Good to have you here. This is Omni View, episode 93, Balanced News Perspectives. Today is June 25th, 2026. Let's look at the day's news from every angle. Venezuela's back-to-back earthquakes have killed at least 32 people and injured hundreds, testing how quickly international rescue teams can reach collapsed buildings in the capital. Two powerful quakes struck the Venezuelan capital, collapsing multiple buildings and prompting an international rescue response. Officials reported at least 32 deaths and around 700 injuries, with volunteers and medics rushing to sites such as the Altamira area. Rescue teams from other countries are expected to arrive in the coming hours. Venezuelan authorities have described the event as a national emergency requiring rapid external support. International observers note that prior sanctions and strained diplomatic ties could slow the arrival of heavy equipment. Neighboring governments and aid organizations frame their offers of help as standard humanitarian practice, yet some regional analysts point to the political isolation that has limited Venezuela's access to routine disaster cooperation channels. The Guardian reports live updates on casualties and rescue efforts, while Al Jazeera provides background on prior U.S.-Venezuela trade patterns that could affect aid routes. How do countries decide which rescue teams to accept first when multiple offers arrive? Shifting now to developments in Asia. Taiwan conducted tabletop military exercises to practice responses to a potential maritime quarantine imposed by China. National Security Council officials confirmed the drills focused on supply line vulnerabilities and port operations. Taiwanese defense planners present the exercises as routine preparation for maintaining essential imports under restricted sea access. Chinese state media have characterized similar drills as unnecessary escalation, while U.S. officials have described them as prudent contingency planning that does not alter the status quo across the strait. Bloomberg details the exercise scope and notes that all parties except Taiwan depends on maritime trade. Disagreement centers on whether public simulation of blockade scenarios reduces or increases the chance of miscalculation. What distinguishes a quarantine from a full blockade under international maritime law? Meanwhile, a warning from U.S. law enforcement. The FBI's deputy director stated that drone attacks observed in overseas conflicts are likely to appear inside the United States. The statement noted that operators could control devices from distant locations such as China. Law enforcement agencies emphasized the need for updated detection and regulatory tools to address small unmanned aircraft that can carry explosives or surveillance equipment. Civil liberties organizations caution that expanded drone monitoring authorities risk broad surveillance of lawful activity. Fox News reports the deputy director remarks and highlights that both sides recognize commercial drone technology has become widely available. The divide lies in whether new restrictions should focus on operator licensing or on hardware capabilities. How are current U.S. drone regulations enforced at the local level? Next, a trade policy change in Europe. The UK government announced it will cut the volume of steel allowed into the country without tariffs starting 1st July. The move aligns with similar EU measures aimed at global oversupply. Domestic steel producers welcome the tighter quotas as protection for local mills facing low-priced imports. Downstream manufacturers that rely on affordable steel argue the change will raise input costs and reduce competitiveness. The Guardian covers the policy announcement and industry reactions, noting both sides agree that Chinese production volumes have increased global supply. Disagreement centers on whether import limits will revive UK capacity or simply shift sourcing patterns. How do safeguard quotas differ from permanent tariffs in trade law? Turning to energy markets. Brent crude has returned to prices last seen before the recent conflict, driven by increased output from several Middle Eastern producers. Energy analysts attribute the decline to restored export volumes that have eased earlier supply concerns. Consumer-facing industries view lower prices as relief for transport and manufacturing costs. Producer governments note that sustained low prices could eventually reduce investment in new fields. Al Jazeera reports the price data and supply context, with all parties agreeing that global inventory levels have risen. Views differ on how long the current balance will hold. What storage and shipping factors allow Middle Eastern producers to increase output quickly? In Kenya, authorities have restricted access to central roads ahead of planned demonstrations marking the anniversary of earlier protests that left more than 80 people dead. Organizers framed the gatherings as demands for accountability and justice for those killed. Security officials described the road closures as necessary to prevent violence and maintain public order. BBC News reports the protest background and security measures, with both sides accepting that previous demonstrations produced casualties. They differ on whether renewed protests are likely to repeat that pattern or remain peaceful. What legal standards govern the use of force during public assemblies in Kenya? Danish justice officials announced they will examine whether nationwide restrictions can be placed on the Muslim call to prayer. The announcement cites concerns that the call should not resemble sounds heard in other cities. Supporters of tighter rules argue that public religious amplification should follow the same noise standards applied to other sources. Muslim community representatives contend that existing local ordinances already address volume and timing without singling out one faith. Mail Online reports the government statement, noting both sides agree that calls to prayer are audible in certain neighborhoods. Disagreement focuses on whether national legislation is required or whether case-by-case enforcement suffices. How do Danish municipalities currently regulate amplified outdoor sound? More retirement plans now offer annuity products, yet most participants continue to choose lump sum or traditional withdrawal options. Plan sponsors cite worker surveys showing concern over outliving savings as the reason for adding annuity choices. Industry observers note that complexity and fees have kept uptake low even when options exist. CNBC reports plan data and participant behavior, with both sides recognizing that longevity risk is real for retirees. They differ on whether education or product design changes would increase usage. What regulatory changes have allowed annuities inside 401k menus? The Chevron finance chief stated that fuel prices are expected to return to earlier levels following an administration review of oil company practices. Company executives attribute recent price movements to global supply adjustments rather than domestic market behavior. Administration officials have pointed to profit margins as justification for the review. CNBC reports executive comments and policy context, with both sides accepting that wholesale gasoline prices have fluctuated. Disagreement centers on the primary drivers behind retail prices at the pump. How do refinery utilization rates and crude inventory reports influence weekly gasoline prices? IBM announced a new transistor architecture that achieves feature sizes below 1 nanometer. Commercial production remains years away. Chip researchers view the development as a potential route to continued performance gains once current manufacturing limits are reached. Industry analysts caution that power consumption, heat, and cost challenges must still be solved before the technology reaches devices. BBC News and Ars Technica report the technical claims, with both sides agreeing that further miniaturization is becoming harder. They differ on whether architectural breakthroughs or new materials will deliver the next leap. What physical limits have historically slowed progress below 5 nanometers? Scotland's national team manager abruptly ended a post-match BBC interview while discussing the slim chances of advancing from the group stage. Supporters have expressed frustration with on-field results and the manager's public comments. Broadcasters note that live interviews after tense matches can produce unplanned exits. Mail Online reports the interview transcript and fan reaction, with both sides accepting that qualification remains mathematically possible. Disagreement focuses on whether the manager's tone reflected team morale or merely irritation with repeated questions. How do post-match interview protocols differ across major tournaments? Designer Jessica McCormack hosted a summer solstice event attended by actors including Jodie Comer and Zoe Kravitz. Fashion coverage has highlighted the guests' outfit choices as typical for high-profile summer gatherings. Event organizers present the party as a private celebration rather than a publicity vehicle. Mail Online reports the guest list and event description, with both sides agreeing that celebrity attendance draws media attention. They differ on whether such events primarily serve social or promotional purposes. What criteria do publications use when selecting which parties receive photo coverage? Now, to really understand the Venezuela earthquake response, most coverage presents foreign rescue teams as arriving almost automatically once a request is made. In practice, offers of assistance must pass through diplomatic channels, receive customs and visa clearances, and be matched to specific skills such as heavy rescue canine units or structural engineering teams. Host governments decide which teams receive landing priority at limited airport slots and which equipment can clear security checks quickly. Knowing this sequence helps listeners assess whether reported delays stem from political friction or from the ordinary logistics of moving specialized personnel and gear across borders. Next time you see headlines about a slow international response, ask which teams were formally invited, what clearances were required, and how many heavy lift aircraft were available at the time. Before we go, tomorrow watch for further updates on which rescue teams reach Venezuela first and how customs clearances affect equipment delivery. That wraps up today's Omni View. Remember, the best informed people read more than one perspective. If this show helps you do that, share it with someone who values fair coverage. See you tomorrow. And before you go, this show is part of the NEH Run Network, a family of daily podcasts on tech, science, and markets. Each one a short, sharp briefing you can finish on the commute. If today earned its place in your feed, here's your next listen. Planetarian Daily, daily breakthroughs in science, health, and longevity. Find every show free at nih-ra-network.com. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.